CosmicRadio.TV.
Cinematalkraphy.
Up in the Air is a Jason Reitman film from 2009. I really love the movie, but there is a teaser trailer that was released to the internet that really struck a chord with me. This all came out while I was in high school, so I was going through kind of a renaissance of film. But the trailer itself was this peculiar little thing where I realized that, trailers can be cut in an interesting way. They can show the film without spoiling everything. They can do something interesting and be an art form of themselves. Now, this teaser trailer was cut together by Jason Reitman himself and released exclusively on slashfilm.com, so I urge you, before you watch this dissection analysis kind of thing, head on over there and check it out. The link is in the description. Now, if you want to, you could kind of think of this as sort of an uninformed literary analysis where I don't really take into account artist intent or anything like that, but I want to discuss some of the elements of this teaser trailer that had an effect on me. Some of those might be intentional, some of those might be unintentional. Either way, I think they're kind of interesting. All right, so I'm going to break this up into 3 different parts. 1, the music, 2, the speech, and 3, kind of a visual shot breakdown. Now, it should be noted for people who care, I am approaching this from the perspective of somebody who's seen the film, so I'm bringing in knowledge that would be considered spoilers. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is the music, because frankly it's the segment that I have the least to say about, but this track is titled Genova by Charles Atlas. It was featured heavily in this teaser trailer, but it was actually used pretty sparingly in the film itself. It's all wonderfully composed, and it sounds beautiful, and it's great, but it's kind of fun to see how the track sort of syncs up with the visual storytelling side of things. Now, when we talk about how it's used structurally throughout the trailer, to simplify it down, this track is broken up into 4 parts, each representing a different sound and tone to play to the trailer without registering as overly repetitious. At the beginning, we skip straight past all of the super soft build-up, and then we jump right into the opening piano chords. It's bold and striking, but still super simplistic, which kind of plays into the opening of Ryan Bingham's speech where he's talking about these super simplistic, smaller things. It's very light, it's not messy and complex yet, but it does build up to that once Clooney starts talking about relationships and the stuff that actually really matters. And I kind of love how there's something strangely contemplative about the track. I don't know anything about music theory or anything, but it sort of has this hopeful, wistful sound to it, while also having this fairly melancholic undertone, which really seems to resonate with Clooney's character. And I do think it's nice that even though it does kind of build up into that messy, complex structure throughout the trailer, it really comes back to its core basics of just those piano chords. Once Clooney notes that, we are not swans, because at the end of the day, that's the most concise, brief explanation of his character's philosophy throughout the film. Alright, so now let's dig into the speech. This is really the crux of the entire teaser trailer. It all boils down to this, it all focuses on this, it centers around this, everything is cut to the speech. And frankly, it's a pretty phenomenal framing device. It introduces our protagonist, Ryan Bingham, played by George Clooney. The speech introduces his beliefs, and it introduces his struggle. It then uses the film to bolster and contextualize the character. It really doesn't give anything away. It's not telling us plot points. It all focuses on building up a structure of a feeling of who this person is and what they might be going through, which is more or less what the film is about. It's just more grounded and structured through the character himself. Alright, now you can say the backpack speech is fairly misguided, but it's a provocative idea. It uses a couple things to be smart, it's a compelling metaphor. One of the best ways to memorize something is to take an idea so absurd and contextualize it in the idea you're trying to convey that it really just locks in your mind. So for instance, in this speech, putting houses, putting people inside of a backpack, it's absurd, but it sticks into your mind, which helps you remember the trailer, it helps you remember the movie, it helps you remember Ryan Bingham and his philosophy on life. It's also clever in the context of him using a backpack, because backpacks are commonplace, particularly in airports, which he is always in. And he's talking about the weight of the backpack, which is also another big airport thing. The weight of your luggage You know, I guess that's more of like a check-in kind of thing, but he's also always talking about traveling light. It's not so much specifically addressed in this speech as given through the trailer, but his travel light philosophy is an outcome of his speech in the film. Now, the way he presents the metaphor helps shift the meaning of weight in a really nice, smooth way. He presents it in such a way that you imagine the physical weight of actual things. You know, when it's the small stuff, you can kind of imagine the weight of something like that going into a backpack. Like that is a reasonable assumption. But then when he starts kicking it up to appliances, you stop thinking about weight so much as you do think about the value of things a little bit more, but not so much sentimental value, but more of a monetary value. And then he broadens the scope even more to allow you to imagine the value of something through which you identify yourself, which holds a bit more weight than, say, how much something cost you, something that you really feel a connection with. He uses that to bridge the metaphor into discussing people and relationships, which you even further identify with yourself and others. Then he says, make no mistakes. Your relationships are the heaviest components in your life. Now that's the real takeaway. That strikes at the core of what is value. And that's the big question that he's been dancing around through the entire speech. He's asking what matters to you, what should matter to you, what does matter to you, what do you care about? And that's a question that he kind of struggles with through the entire film, even though he presents himself as somebody who kind of has it all figured out. Then we come up on a really interesting line. The slower we move, the faster we die. Now this is kind of an obvious layup to his "we are sharks" theme that he has going on through here that he really lays into at the end, but it also speaks to his perspective of seeing it all end. He's thinking more the death of the spirit than of the body itself. This really comes to light and becomes kind of poignant when you put it in the context of his character's fear of being grounded from flight, his career coming to an end, and when his life is the career that's the end of his life. He always wants to be moving, quite physically, across the country in planes. And at the point that he's giving this speech, he's deflected so many quote-unquote heavy relationships to focus on his work and to travel light, to abide by this outlook on life, that even though he's still doing the same work with the same people, doing the same kind of stuff, but he's doing it in a different way. That kind of shift in workflow throws him so off balance, puts him off guard enough that it shakes the structure of his philosophy at its very core. Because to the character Ryan Bingham, he is just one step closer to being obsolete, not needed, therefore being fired from his job, which he's dedicated his entire lifestyle to. So he is one step closer to having absolutely nothing. Then he makes the point that moving is living. In the film, as he gives the speech, you can hear him make a comment about, you know, you have all of this tremendously heavy stuff inside of your backpack. Now try to walk. It's not in the trailer itself, but I think it really speaks to how he views relationships and how he views being tied down and anchored by things. And so I think in many ways, Ryan Bingham feels very stifled by people. That is, until he comes across Vera Farmiga's character Alex. And now for the third talking point, the visual treatment. All right, so the first shot opens up on the backpack. That's a really great way to familiarize the audience with the backpack, which is kind of the whole point of the speech.
Now, this is going to be a little difficult, so stay with me.
But then we get like this really great iconic visual imagery that shows up on, you know, posters and trailers, you know, this nice grid-like layout in the terminal. And here I think it's kind of worth noting George Clooney and Anna Kendrick's positioning in this frame. We have Anna Kendrick off to the side. She's very focused on her phone, which she is kind of throughout the film, and we'll see evidence of that a little bit more later. But she has a really peculiar arrangement of her luggage. She's sitting on it. She's very immobile. She kind of has a bulky silhouette here. I think that kind of speaks to her character's desire to be grounded and docked and not always moving and flying about and living light. Her posturing very visually represents her character's purpose in the eyes of Ryan Bingham. Whereas if we look at George Clooney's posture here, we can see that he is kind of as far away from his luggage as physically possible. He has it really far out to his side. It leaves a very light imprint on his mobility. He is in every way using his body to communicate that he is just like ready to go at a moment's notice. And George Clooney is looking out into the distance He is looking out of the window, he is seeing the plane, the thing that's going to take him to where he needs to go. He is more than anything focused on the fact that he needs to be moving than where he is at. Now that was more a look at kind of the static, stationary objects in the shot, but if we look at the paths of motion, the movement in the shot, I think it's kind of interesting noting the two planes of walking.
How much does your life weigh?
In the foreground, we have these people walking back and forth, but we have George Clooney and Anna Kendrick off in the background kind of doing their own thing. Now, I think it kind of goes without saying that this is more an artifact of clarity than anything, but from kind of a symbolic point of view, I think it's sort of cool that it kind of separates the two characters from the crowd that they're preparing to leave. In some kind of way, it sort of shows that the moving crowd as the bulk of society, people who live with relationships, with people, with baggage, with all of that stuff that Ryan Bingham really makes an effort to distance himself from. And so clearly Ryan Bingham is separated from everybody else, but also Anna Kendrick's character is out there with Ryan Bingham. She's kind of being taken under his wing at this point in the film. So she is also in some form or manner being separated from society in the same way that he is.
Imagine for a second that you're carrying a backpack. I want you to pack it.
And now we're getting a string of all of this phenomenal aerial photography that graces the film, especially most notably in the opening title sequence. Although these shots are presented in a little bit more of a tame fashion than it is in that sequence.
With all the stuff that you have in your life, you start with the little things.
All right, the next shot we see Bingham on one of those airport subway kind of things, which shows that in some sense he's still kind of traveling, still kind of moving, but he's also very stationary. He's also very like fixed and locked into where he's at. Sort of kind of how he is in life.
The things on shelves and in drawers. And
then we got all of these close-ups that contrast the line, the little things. And in the film itself, a lot of these shots are used still in context of Ryan Bingham giving a voiceover, although in the film he very specifically notes that they are
warm reminders that I'm home.
Which in many ways represents Ryan Bingham's form of these little things, these things that you put on your shelves, these little knickknacks. And that kind of kicks off a theme that's represented throughout the remainder of the trailer, where Ryan Bingham kind of speaks to elements in normal people's everyday lives, and then these shots very clearly contrast what he's saying with his warped perspective on that subject.
Next, you start adding larger stuff.
Now, as he starts transitioning into talking about adding larger stuff into the backpack, I really appreciate this transition here, where there's a top-down view in the airport terminal that then cuts over to a top-down view of a downtown city landscape, which really goes to broaden the scope in a sense of scale and perspective in a very literal way when Ryan Bingham is speaking more on a metaphorical way.
Clothes, tabletop appliances, lamps, your TV.
As with the little things comparison, now Ryan Bingham is talking about appliances and stuff like that, things, larger items that you would find inside of your home. And we are seeing things that represent that to Ryan Bingham. We are seeing hotel amenities.
Backpack should be getting pretty heavy now. You go bigger.
And I really love this stern, contemplative, concerned look on Clooney's face in this shot. I don't remember specifically whether this shot ended up in the film or not, but paired up with him continually adding larger and larger things into the backpack, and considering that Ryan Bingham knows where this speech is going, it kind of implies that, you know, maybe he's having some second thoughts. Maybe he's having some sort of inner turmoil, some kind of conflict. And whether that's him considering whether he should be more invested in these heavier things in life, or whether he's concerned that he's already let on too much heavy stuff and he needs to start considering to empty the backpack.
Your couch.
And we also continue the trend of landscape establishing shots to represent a sense of scale. This time it's not a top-down view of a downtown, but is now more of an angled 3/4 perspective on a larger city landscape. So not just downtown, but the suburbs outstretching from it.
Your car, your home. I want you to stuff it all.
So now that we have reached this tier in Ryan Bingham's attachments, I think it's really revealing of his character that his almost completely unfurnished, unadorned apartment weighs much more heavily on his soul than say the things that he finds comfort in, you know, his hotel amenities and his little things. Even though he spends effectively no time here, he puts no attention, no care into it, it is still very much his anchor. It is his root. It is what ties him down
into that backpack. Now, I want you to fill it with people.
Now, this location establishing shot is kind of interesting because all the other ones were very visually clear and distinctive to somebody who's maybe never seen the film before. I'm sure this wouldn't off-put anybody who had never seen the film before or anything, but for somebody who has, you recontextualize it in such a way that it's far more meaningful, because as Ryan Bingham is giving his voiceover about how meaningful and how heavy relationships can be, the shot is very important as it establishes Ryan Bingham as he is heading out to his sister's wedding in Milwaukee. And this ends up being a very crucial moment for Ryan Bingham, as this is kind of the first time in a very long time that he's actually seeking approval from other people. He brings Alex with him. He wants a connection with Alex. He wants to show her that he's a good guy. He wants to repair his relationship with his sisters. And on some level, he's finally starting to feel the crushing deterioration of relationships when they go long neglected because of his crazy isolated lifestyle.
Start with casual acquaintances, friends of friends, folks around the office.
I think it also speaks to something deep within Ryan Bingham, something that's not apparent at the beginning of the film, but becomes more apparent later on, is that as he's describing these people, these acquaintances, the people who rank lowest among them are some people like flight attendants, who are people who he actually sees on a far, far, far more frequent basis than the people who actually matter to him. As we go up the scale of people who matter more and more to him, we see that he has basically less and less communication with them.
And then you move into the people that you trust with your most intimate secrets.
Now, this is the first of 2 times that it happens, but I think it's a very clever foreshadowing that's happening in this trailer, where George Clooney voices over the word secrets twice throughout the entire trailer, and both times Vera Farmiga is on screen. I have a very hard time believing that this is coincidence and anything less than intentional, because this is a really great way of very subtly establishing this secrecy in the Alex character, which really goes to build an air of mystery around her character and ends up subverting everything that Ryan Bingham works for towards the end of the film.
Brothers, your sisters, your children, your parents, and finally your husband, your wife.
Now, many of the rest of these shots are very clear in their interpretation of the voiceovers. So you have these relationship roles, and they're very directly reflected in what Ryan Bingham is saying.
Boyfriend, your girlfriend. You get them into that backpack. Feel the weight of that.
Including this great close-up shot with Anna Kendrick's phone, where she is broken up with over text message, reading, "I think it's time we see other people." And speaking towards the weight of that bag, that crushing misery is probably one of the emotions that most weighs it down. Now, there are other examples of that emotion that are found throughout the film, but obviously this is kind of one of the lower risk ones to reveal and evoke that effect out of the audience without spoiling too much of the narrative arc of the film.
Make no mistake, your relationships are the heaviest components in your life. All those
You could argue his use of negotiations here paired up with George Clooney and Anna Kendrick, and then some of the aerial shots kind of represent sort of Ryan Bingham negotiating to keep his job. So he has Natalie Keener following him around. Their posture in this shot more or less kind of speaks to their relationship dynamic, where Ryan Bingham has this seniority and he's really kind of looking down on Natalie. And through a lot of the film, he's more or less bullying her into seeing his side of the argument, although he is framing it through the guise of negotiations.
Negotiations and arguments and secrets.
And then there's our second implication of secrets with Alex.
And compromises.
In the middle of this line, we see Alex leaving Ryan, and Ryan's kind of in this point of contemplation. In some sense, his relationship with Alex hasn't changed a tremendous amount since they first met. He does feel like he's losing her, because if the slower you move, the faster you die, and Ryan isn't moving at all, he's completely stationary, then he's long since been dead. And in this moment, he's very much considering whether it's possible for him to even escape the abysmal depths that he feels he is certainly facing.
The slower we move, the faster we...
And also, I want to take a second to really just appreciate this shot of Anna Kendrick. First and foremost, I just think it's really visually striking imagery. And it really works towards continuing the running theme that we've seen throughout the trailer, and you see it a lot in the movie as well, of people moving without moving. They're kind of stationary, but they're on something that is transporting them to another place. And when paired with Ryan Bingham's line, "The slower we move, the faster we die," this is kind of a turning point of the trailer, right? So this is the point at which Natalie Keener is kind of realizing that this job presents the facade of moving while she's actually kind of stagnant and not doing anything, sort of in this lifeless drift. And we just came out of that shot with Ryan Bingham standing there as life passes him by.
Die. Make no mistake, moving is living.
And now, as Ryan says, make no mistake, moving is living, we basically see a bunch of shots of Ryan pursuing Alex. To him, that's what moving has become. It has become less of a physically put my body on one side of the country and then put it on another side of the country. It is now moving is sort of this thing where he's like, oh, I need to pursue a person. I need to go after them. To him, that is moving, and that is living. And he kind of has this new outlook. But we only view it through that kind of context given this specific footage. If only listening to the speech, or if listening to the speech in its original context in the film, it has a far more bleak outlook. It all goes towards Ryan talking about getting rid of everybody, cutting your ties, cutting your attachments to all people, basically, and living a strange, isolated, solitary life. So it's kind of funny that in the trailer it has so much more of an optimistic, hopeful outlook, which goes towards two purposes. One, it goes towards selling people to see the film. It's a lot harder to sell a film where you're like, hey, it's going to be super depressing. And two, it very much goes to speak towards the character arc of Ryan Bingham, but it does so in a way that's nuanced.
Some animals were meant to carry each other, to live symbiotically over a lifetime. Star-crossed lovers, monogamous swans. We are not swans.
And of course, here at the very end, as Ryan's delivering his pointed observation that we are not swans, we are sharks, we then see footage from the scene that has the single most contrast between the swan philosophy and the shark philosophy.
We're sharks.
And then we round it all up as a nice bookend to see George Clooney's face again as he's delivering the speech. And then we jump to some great cloud photography again. And that's it. That is the Up in the Air teaser trailer analysis thing. Obviously, I read into some of that a little bit more than I normally would, but I just figured it would be kind of a fun exercise to kind of really dig deep into this. Now, if you want to see more stuff like this, you can find more of our episodes of Cinematography over at CosmicRadio.TV/Cinematography. You can also find these episodes over at youtube.com/CosmicRadio.TV. Now, if you have any comments or suggestions, you can leave those not only in the comments down below, but also on Twitter. The show is at Cinematalkraphy, and I personally am at Gatowag, Gatowag. Holla at your boy. But also, if email is your kind of thing, you can email us over at cinematography@gmail.com. So let us know what you thought about Up in the Air or the teaser trailer. I mean, more specifically, you should probably talk about the teaser trailer. That's kind of what this whole thing's about. Or if you just want to say something about movies, like, that's cool too. Or if you just want to say something, I mean, we'll listen. I don't know. Goodbye.
This has been a CosmicRadio.TV production. For more awesome shows, head on over to our website, CosmicRadio.TV.